Thank you for joining me for another episode of Taste of Magic. This is my pre-release primer for Return to Ravnica. I'm going to be telling you about each of the 5 guilds and how to play them. The first guild is Azorius. There's a 3-step process when you're dealing with Azorius, and it is as follows. Step number 1 is waiting. When you're playing blue and white, you want to be reactive as opposed to proactive. If you are given the option, you want to draw first as opposed to playing first because cards are more important than going first. You want to react to what your opponent's doing, and in the end, you want to extend the game as long as you can because later in the game, you want to have big creatures that are going to win you the game. Step number 2 is detain, bounce, and counter creatures of all shapes and sizes early in the game. This is going to keep you alive, but it's also going to make sure that the creatures that you do have out can attack without being blocked. Which brings us to step number 3. Attack without worry of blockers. Later in the game, once you get your giant creatures out, you can still keep detaining creatures on the other side and attack with your giant creatures. Some creatures which will allow you to detain as you attack, and you can attack into an empty board basically. This will help you win the game. Also, if you just want to wait it out, you can get filibuster counters until you actually win the game. Of course, that's whether or not you have that card. And that is how you play Azorius. Golgari. Golgari is probably one of the easier guilds to play. Step number 1 is play your creatures. You want to play your creatures early and as fast as you can. Step number 2 is you want to trade creatures. What I mean by this is when combat occurs, you want your creature and your opponent's creature both to die. And the reason for this is you want your creatures dead while they don't want their creatures dead. Step number 3, scavenge creatures. The creatures that you let die earlier in the game, killing off their creatures, now you can scavenge them to make the creatures that you still have much bigger. When you're playing Golgari, you want a very creature heavy deck, possibly even more creature heavy than normal. So you want to be able to scavenge creatures, and you want to never be able to run out of creatures. At the same time, you shouldn't play less lands because some of the scavenge costs are a little bit more expensive, so you do need that land later in the game. But if normally you would play a 40 card deck with 17 lands, 17 creatures, and 6 spells, you might want to go up to 18 or 19 creatures if you have enough scavenge creatures. The next guild is Izzet. Step number 1 with Izzet is not what you might think it is, but I think it is cast creatures. You want to focus on cheap creatures that benefit from and benefit your spells. Cards like Nivix Guildmage, Goblin Electromancer, Gutter Snipe, and Blister Core Wield are amazing in an Izzet deck. The Guildmage allows you to copy spells later in the game. Electromancer allows you to have reduced costs for your spells. Gutter Snipe deals damage whenever you cast instants and sorceries, and Blister Core Weird gets bigger every time you cast an instant or sorcery. So the 4 of these are very cheap, and they're your best friends. Put as many copies as you can into your Izzet decks. Step number 2 is play spells. Sorceries and instants are your best friend when you're playing Izzet. Now, only play spells that you have to play because you want to save those spells as often as you can if you can overload them. Step number 3 is overload the spells. Once you have enough mana to overload your spells, overload as many spells as you can because this is really going to win you the game. Overload spells are so amazing. Things that do 4 damage to every creature you don't control, tapping every creature you don't control, making your creatures unblockable, making your creatures hexproof, all kinds of things that you want to do to win the game. Rakdos. Step number 1 with Rakdos is unleash your creatures. Most of your unleashed creatures are very cheap, only 2 or 3 mana to play. You want to unleash them early and you want to unleash them often so that you can put the pressure on your opponent. Step number 2. Remove any blockers. You're playing red and black and you have the best removal in the game. So remove any blockers that are giving you a lot of trouble. Things that have a high toughness, walls, things that you just can't kill for whatever reason. Use your removal spells to get rid of them so that you can keep attacking and be a threat. Step number 3 is just keep attacking. You want to get in there as fast as possible and do your damage and win the game as fast as you can. The longer the game goes on, the less chance you have of winning because your creatures are less expensive than the other guilds, and in the long run, they might be smaller. Also, in the long run, the lack of blockers is going to hurt you. So, don't be afraid to take damage, but in the later game, you might need to cast some spells and not unleash them. So, that is what you need to do to win with Rakdos. The last guild is Selesnya. Step number 1 with Selesnya is make creature tokens. Selesnya wants to do one thing, and that is make as many creature tokens as possible. Early in the game, focus on making 1/1 birds, 2/2 knights, and 3/3 centaurs. Cards like Call the Conclave and Selesnya Charm are your best friends in doing this early in the game. Step number 2 is populate those tokens. Populate cards that give you a token in addition to populating are very expensive. Eyes in the Skies is 4 mana and Curses of Cord is 6 mana. But other cards that populate are much cheaper. Sundering Growth, which allows you to destroy an artifact or an enchantment, also allows you to populate. Later in the game, Tristani's Judgment is a great card because it exiles target creature in addition to populating yourself. Step number 3 with Selesnya is attack with the giant army of tokens that you've created. Cards like Rootborn Defenses and Druid's Deliverance are going to allow you to do this. Rootborn Defenses allows you to make one big block before your attack and not worry about any of your creatures dying. Druid's Deliverance is going to allow you to not worry about having blockers, as they can attack into pretty much an empty board on your side, and you can just prevent the damage and make another creature. Boosting your army is great. Cards like Phantom General are a great card. Rare cards like Wild Beastmaster and Collective Blessing are also very amazing when you have a lot of creatures. Another strategy you might take once you're attacking with a giant army is boosting one creature and giving it trample with Chorus of Might. Another strategy you might want to do is taking a card from another guild, which is the Golgari Decoy. Once you do your final big attack, the only card they'll be able to block is the Decoy, and the rest of your tokens can get through. And that is how you win with Selesnya. Thank you for joining me for this pre-release primer, and I hope to see you in future episodes, and have fun this weekend at the pre-release.